There's a reason Henry Morgan is one of the most famous pirates of all time. His acts of privateering for the British government, acting as a thorn in the side of the Spanish throughout the Caribbean, were so effective and impactful that it would earn him knighthood, granted by King Charles II. His exploits were made possible due to his tactical genius that allowed him to overcome his enemies even when the odds were stacked against him. Even when he retired from the high seas, Captain Morgan would continue to stand out from his peers, becoming the governor of one of the British's most prized Caribbean territories. This is the story of Captain Henry Morgan, and this is Learn Something New. Henry Morgan was born in 1635 in Wales. There's not much known about the famed pirate's upbringing, but although it's believed his formal education was short, he was widely perceived throughout his life as a very intelligent man. And while it's unknown what his youth was like, it's believed that he joined a force that was instructed to sail to the West Indies as part of the military force put together by Oliver Cromwell, a member of the English Parliament, who was hoping to disrupt the Spanish colonies there as part of the Anglo-Spanish War. It was during the Anglo-Spanish War that Morgan linked up with a band of privateers led by Vice Admiral Sir Christopher Mings. This group introduced Morgan into the time's more acceptable form of piracy, privateering. Pirates and privateers often looked very similar if you merely observed their actions and outcomes. However, there was one distinct difference. The pirates were raiding ships in ports throughout the Caribbean with no regard for statehood or legality. If you had something they wanted, you were fair game. Privateers, on the other hand, would exercise discretion when picking out their targets, operating as an unconventional extension of a particular nation's military force, with the goal of disrupting the naval operations of their foreign adversaries. Henry Morgan proved himself under Vice Admiral Mings while extending his Caribbean network to include a beneficial friendship with the governor of Jamaica, a colony that the English had taken from the Spanish during the Anglo-Spanish War. The governor, Sir Thomas Modiford, had been newly appointed to the governorship of Jamaica with explicit instructions to reduce the level of privateers, going as far as to make a proclamation against the practice in June of 1664. But since around 1,500 privateers had been frequenting Jamaica, adding significantly to the colony's economy, it quickly became clear that to turn them away was to invite economic hardship. Within the month, the policy was reversed. While Governor Modiford had been running the colony, Henry Morgan was busy at work, sacking Campeche and attacking Santiago de Cuba. By the time Henry made landfall at Port Royal in August of 1665, he had an extremely large amount of loot to share with the local government. The governor was impressed with Morgan and would quickly take advantage of Morgan's skills in the high seas as tensions rose again between the English and the Spanish. In 1667, Governor Modiford issued Morgan a letter of marque. The letter of marque was the formal commissioning of a privateer into an agreement that they be allowed to commit acts of piracy against the enemy, in this case, the Spanish, without any fear of punishment or retribution from the English on the condition that he shared in his take of the loot with the British government. That just left Henry Morgan to assemble his crew and ship out in late 1668 on the Oxford, a frigate that the governor gave him to help him be even more effective on the high seas. This didn't go well. Just a few months after setting sail, a party on board the ship, which saw many of the sailors firing their firearms in celebration, accidentally set fire to the ship's freshly stocked gunpowder stores. The ensuing blast completely destroyed the ship, killing nearly all 200 men aboard. Henry Morgan, along with 9 others, were the only survivors. Despite the setback, Captain Morgan pushed on, getting a new crew together to attack Santiago, Cuba, then Maracaibo in modern-day Venezuela, where they were finally cornered in the port of the fort there. 3 Spanish warships trapped Morgan's crew in, ready to fire on them if they tried to leave the lagoon. But Captain Morgan wasn't going down without a fight. Being outnumbered, he needed to flex his tactical brilliance. Morgan's crew took one of the merchant ships they had captured and cut holes across the side of the ship, placing logs in them that had been painted black to look like cannons, with wooden figures wearing sailor's gear placed on the deck. When night came, 12 men sailed the ship directly at the Spanish blockade. As they neared the Magdalene, the ship that had been leading the Spanish fleet, the men abandoned the ship, but not before setting fuses on many barrels of gunpowder they had set in the hold of their ship. Rowing to safety, the men could see that the merchant ship exploded right next to the Magdalene, setting it on fire and catching the Spanish crew completely off guard. One of the 3 Spanish ships, sent into a frenzy of panic and confusion, accidentally ran aground. Now, with the playing field leveled, Captain Morgan managed to successfully capture the 3rd and final Spanish vessel. But despite this initial success, the crew weren't out of hot water yet, as further down the channel, the Spanish had retaken the fortress that Morgan's crew had initially sacked. If they were to sail back through, the fortress's cannons would rip them to shreds. However, Morgan had a plan for this as well. He sent small boats full of men to the shores ahead of the fortress, before turning around and bringing back all of the men, though they were hidden out of sight. The Spanish thought that boatloads of men seemingly being brought to land meant that an attack from the side was imminent, so they hauled all of the fortress's cannons over to the side of the fortress where the attack would come from. Little did they know, everyone was still accounted for on Morgan's ships, and they were able to sail through the channel back to the ocean without needing to fire a shot at the fortress, making their clean getaway with over 250,000 silver pesos in loot. It's fair to say that by the time Captain Morgan had returned to Port Royal, he had more than proved his worth as a privateer. By the end of 1670, Captain Henry Morgan commanded a fleet of 33 ships and around 2,000 men. A venerable naval militia now, Morgan set his sights on the largest raid yet. He would be taking the fight to Panama. The ensuing campaign throughout 1671 would run through the Spanish troops stationed across Panama, burning down settlements and fortresses as they went. But despite the success of the raids, the rewards for their efforts were less than ideal. The Spanish, by this point, had already removed many of the valuables the area had been known for. After Spain demanded Captain Morgan be charged for his actions in Panama, the British government relented, arresting Morgan and sending him to London in April of 1672. Yet, despite the British putting forth a political theater to appease Spain, they were quietly pleased with the buccaneers' actions across the Spanish settlements. Captain Morgan wouldn't be imprisoned during his time in London. In fact, in January of 1674, not only would King Charles II of England knight Henry Morgan for his efforts in support of the crown, but then he would proceed to appoint him as Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica, the island that he had brought back so many of his riches to. It was there that he would get the opportunity to serve as deputy governor until 1682, taking this time to improve the port's defensive capabilities and allowing those on the island to skirt taxes proposed by the British government. His time pillaging the high seas may have been over, but piracy as a whole would only just be getting started, as the golden age of piracy was just beginning. On August 25th, 1688, Sir Henry Morgan passed away at just 53 years old, believed to have died from liver cirrhosis brought on by decades of heavy drinking. Upon his passing, he was buried in a ceremony with full military honors. Henry Morgan represented a side of the time period less often discussed. The state sanctioned piracy as a means of sabotaging their foreign rivals while enriching themselves. Captain Morgan was prolific during his time on the high seas, showcasing his tactical brilliance in the face of overwhelming odds, and exhibiting some of the most fascinating tales that have arisen from this era of history. Thank you for watching Learn Something New. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel so that you can see more videos like this one. If you want to further support the channel, check out the channel Patreon, linked below in the description. Thank you so much to the patrons who continue helping make these videos possible, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.